Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. I love that you're all spread out. Look at my eye moving. Thank you for coming. Today is actually a very special day, I think, for everyone. So we need some action, am I right? We need more than that. Come on. We need some action. So this is our action to end human violence election forum. Now I said forum, I didn't say debate. Okay, we want to hear about policy. We don't want people slagging each other off. So, firstly, I'll introduce myself. My name is Amelia Rose. For those who don't know who I am, I founded Western Sydney Women, and we want confident, financially independent women, because when you have confidence and money, you have choice. And when you have choice, you can lead, right? And it doesn't have to be any particular situation based on the topic of today. We know what we mean by you can lead. So we want to make sure they have job readiness, confidence, a community that supports them, which is the community today and extends far and wide. And speaking of community and reaching out, I'd like you to follow the hashtag. Now, this is a hashtag I think we should be using permanently. So any post that you do from now on, add this to it so people can actually follow what you're doing in your personal journey, whatever it is you're doing to help them, whatever it is you're doing to advocate for this, make sure people know about it. The hashtag is action to end gendered violence. Okay, so put it in your notes, because that way we need to use it copy paste. We do it on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, you name it. The best way to communicate what's happening today, but also what's happening in the future. And I would actually like to bring up Delia to do the those who don't know, we have the CEO of Domestic Violence and the people representing specialists in the family. Probably, I'd say, the hardest job in New South Wales, right? I think, am I right? Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you.
Something to continue. But before I begin, I will be speaking later, but I'd like to acknowledge that I'm continue on direct land. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome, everybody.
And just as an FYI, we had Nicholas Howe, he was going to move on to the country today, but he's not well. So we wish him an absolute quick recovery. Now I would like to invite the professor to the stage. Now I do like professors. I'm a bit of a addiction to degrees and to go to university. So I'm on my fourth at the moment in law, actually, so I can understand legislation, so I can communicate it to people, which I think is important. So I'd like to invite up Professor Brian South, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences Professor.
Thank you, and thank you for your commitment to lifelong learning. And we have a lot of degrees here. I'd also like to acknowledge traditional owners of the land and pay respects to elders past and present, and pay particular welcome to the Aboriginal and people who are joining us today. Thank you very much for inviting me to open this meeting and for having me here at School of Social Sciences at Western Sydney University. As Amanda said, my background, I'm a senior manager now at Western Sydney University, but I do have a background in community justice and civil researcher, and have a background in social work. So the area of gender violence, domestic violence, family violence, are areas that I've throughout my career, and particularly the research I was involved in research in the UK, language law, legislation in the UK at that time. But as a practitioner, I worked in the second man within Ireland, working a lot with young people and adults as well. And family violence and gender violence is incredibly important part of their lives in the work. I was reflecting, this is I prepared for today. I did in my practice experience, I did work with
two people who were tragically murdered within their family, but I worked with countless others who were family violence and gender violence was a major impact in their lives. So I would just like to commend Delia and Amanda, all of you working in this area, and thank you for putting this event on today. There's a number of ways that we can respond, and gender violence is an important way is supporting people who have been victims and who are currently experiencing that. And I'm very proud to work for a university that leads on this in terms of policy, enterprise agreement, supporting young personnel. But one other way in which this can be that we can address gender violence is through raising awareness. I would particularly like to thank the speakers today. And we are in an election campaign, and there's lots of places they can be. There's lots of issues that they can talk about. And the fact that it shows them to come here today to talk about gender violence, to talk about family violence, I think it's to their credit, and really consider the importance that it is for people who've organised the event. Finally, I would, without wanting to tread into presentations will come later on, but as speaking from a university, one of the things I would want to say, and one of the things you might expect me to say, is that when we talk about response to violence, to gender violence, in the same way as we talk about responding to any of the other big challenges society faces at the moment, there's a real importance in being evidence-led, in making sure that the outcomes, the recommendations that we make, the policies that we put in place are led by evidence. And when it comes to gender violence, there's a lot of things we know. We know a lot about what works in rehabilitation, what doesn't work. We know a lot about what works in responding to trauma and offering support to victims. We know a lot about the importance of interventions that aren't just located within the criminal justice system and aren't just abstract facts, but are interventions that are community-led, community-based, and where funding goes away from large institutions into community groups. And I would ask that as we discussed it today, as we participate in this forum, that we have that in the forefront of what we talk about, that where the evidence leads, that's what policy should follow, that's what practice should follow. And because that's such an important part of the discussion, that's why I'm really pleased, and I'd like to thank my colleague, Professor Robinson, for bringing this today. It's so appropriate, it's so pleasing that the event of this sort is happening in the university campus and the School of Social Science, and we're very happy about it.
Like a continual learning idea, maybe this university next to my list. I'd like to invite back up to the stage CEO of Domestic Violence in New South Wales. And something I wanted just to quickly mention before the forum is I'm not a fan of when people copy people's ideas, right? But today I am. Because if whoever ends up in government, whatever ideas, like in the evidence space that we just discussed there, whatever idea works, take it and do it. Let's not do it just because someone else came up with the idea. Let's do it because it's the right thing to do.
Education should be accessible for everybody, unless something you want to be Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here today. I will again just acknowledge that I need to be on Aboriginal land and I pay my respects for this past, present and emerging, with always north and always will be Aboriginal land. I also acknowledge the terrible impact domestic violence has on individuals, families and communities. And acknowledge the strength and resilience of children and adults who have and are still experiencing domestic family violence. I pay my respects to those who did not survive, their families, their friends, and their community. Thank you very much for having me here today, everyone. As you know, I'm Delia Donovan. I'm the CEO of Domestic Violence New South Wales. And it is a tough job, but it's certainly a job that's really purposeful and incredible, very specific. People think they're all bigger than me, but an incredible team that's behind the scenes and an awful amount of work. So Domestic Violence New South Wales, statewide peak body representing over 150 members across the state, including 130 specialist domestic and family violence services. What an evidence base. So why are we here today? We're here today because we want to see action to end gendered violence, as our election platform states. We're here because domestic, sexual and family violence has never been more of a national crisis. And I find myself always saying that, but I really believe, I know I don't have to first it. This is a national crisis. We lost 56 women last year and 5 women this year. This is utterly tragic. We're here today because we as a group want to see change, and this election platform provides that action. The New South Wales Women's Alliance initially presented its 2023 election platform, Action to End Gender Violence, in August at Government House, aiming to set out to the next New South Wales Parliament how we can work together. And I think that's a really big important part of my speech today. It's about working with government to give back, providing solutions and working together. So how we can ensure women, families and communities in New South Wales can be free from violence, have equal rights, equal opportunities and the freedom to reach their potential.
Who are the New South Wales Women's Alliance? We are an alliance of peak organisations and statewide specialist services providing and responding to and working to prevent domestic, sexual and family violence. Building on our last election platform, which was 2018, which was Safe State. And I remember actually working in another organisation when Safe State came about, and there was about 40 actions or so. So we've been really considered with 7 calls to action, really trying to get those tangible asks locked down to 7. And again, when we do this kind of calling on the government, it's calling on the government in partnership and working together. So these 7 calls to action that we would love to work with government on are: 1, a coordinated whole of government approach to domestic, sexual and family violence policy in New South Wales. Let's break those silos. 2, a commitment to intersectional primary prevention to stop the violence before it starts. I had a good chat this morning on ABC about prevention and what it means and how we can get into priority settings, work in school and really think about that respectful education and some of that unconscious bias that sits within systems and structures and what we read, see and hear in media. 3, no surprises to the services I represent, immediate and long-term supports for people experiencing and recovering from domestic, sexual and family violence. 4, safe and appropriate housing. Gosh, we cannot drive that home any more than we are. We need supply, we need affordable housing, we need appropriate and safe housing beyond crisis. That's absolutely paramount. 5, reforming the legal systems and policing for people experiencing domestic, sexual and family violence. And there's a huge amount of work to do. We know that the police will get a phone call every 2 minutes about a domestic and family violence incident. We know that the domestic and family violence cases represent 60% of their workload. So we want to work really, really closely with police and look at that trauma-informed work. 6, as an ally organisation and as an ally in the New South Wales Women's Alliance, we want to enable Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to lead the change. They know the solutions. We want to see Aboriginal community-controlled organisations funded and leading that self-determination and solutions within their community. And finally, 7, we want to see the development and implementation of workforce development planning. We know some work started and is underway, which is fantastic. And we really want to recognise just how complex and incredible our workforce is and how we want to attract the workforce. We want to get people into it and we want to pay them properly. So today, we're going to hear from the Minister for Women's Safety and Prevention of Domestic and Sexual Violence, Natalie Ward. Thank you for being here. Jodie Harrison, MP, Labour. Thank you again for being here. Looking forward to hearing from you too. Abigail Boyd, MLC, the Greens. Really excited to hear from you. Alison Waters, Animal Justice Party. And Mark Banksiak, MLC, Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party. I think what's wonderful today is to have that bipartisan approach and hear about those joint commitments to domestic, sexual and family violence. So we look forward to hearing from each of you, and we can't wait to hear your action to end gendered violence. Thank you very much, everyone. Very specific targets there. I like it. So it's like a checklist for everyone, correct? Yes. And from my perspective, I'm asked often about what needs to happen, and I'm an advocate for accountability as well. So I believe that perpetrators need to be held accountable for their activities, and that people, including the police, need to take them, you know, these allegations and what women are going through more seriously. I have personal experience and friends with personal experience and not being taken seriously, and that's not good enough. So mine's about accountability plus everything you said as well. Okay, I would like to invite up to the stage another Amanda. We've got a proud Yorta woman, I think I've pronounced it correctly, and survivor advocate, Amanda Morgan. Please, warm welcome.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to start firstly by acknowledging that we are meeting on the lands of the Darug people. I'm a proud Yorta woman, and I acknowledge my ancestors from Yorta country, but we are meeting on Darug land today. And I also pay respects to all the Indigenous kin in the audience as well. I'm extremely privileged to be on this stage. I understand that storytelling is a really important part of our culture. And it's a really important part of our healing as survivor advocates as well. So with that, on that note, I would like to say thank you to Domestic Violence New South Wales and also the New South Wales Women's Alliance for the opportunity to speak today. It's a really big deal, so thank you. I note first that survivors are not an homogenous group, so I can really only speak to my lived experience. I can't speak to everything in the paper, but I would like to speak to my lived experience and the recommendations that I support. I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse and family violence. When I was 5, it occurred, and prior to that, when I was an infant. When I was 5, I reported that to my mum, and she believed me and reported that to the police. My mother was believed, and the police did investigate, but the investigation wasn't thorough. They neglected to present themselves as safe people to my family, to my mum, to my siblings, to myself. And as a result, there were a lot of interview questions that they didn't ask, that they should have, that would have uncovered further evidence that could have led to multiple cases. The police didn't ask my mum about her marriage, and they didn't ask her about her family life. They didn't ask my siblings about our family life. And it's for this reason that I support New South Wales Police being trained to appropriately identify sexual, domestic and family violence, and specialised training to investigate sexual offences, to ensure that police do respond in a trauma-informed and culturally supportive way. Because the police didn't ask those questions, my mum didn't think about herself. She didn't think about the fact that she was living in a marriage where she was being maritally raped for 6 years. She only thought of me, which is beautiful and loving, but concerning. She only thought to put her child first. My mum didn't understand the implication of the questions that the police asked her or the suggestions they made. Those questions were things like, do you really want to put your 5-year-old daughter on the stand? Of course she didn't. And so she answered just that. No, I don't. Of course I don't want to put my 5-year-old daughter on the stand. As a result, the case was closed because the police decided that it was my word against his. And that's also why I support a trauma-informed model of supporting victims through that process of reporting and through that process of giving evidence. Because if they'd conducted those interviews in a trauma-informed and culturally responsive way, chances are my mum would have recognised them as safe people, and she might have given a bit more evidence, tendency evidence perhaps, and things would have come to light, and something could have been done, but as a result, nothing came of that. And I was forced to spend visitation with my perpetrator. So I remember the day that my mum told me that she had been maritally raped, and I wailed. It was actually this year. It was earlier on this year. I wailed for 15 minutes and I rocked back and forward. I was shocked. It was overwhelming because I hadn't put the dots together. The reason why I share this is because I know that there are a lot of survivors out there who haven't told their story, who haven't talked about their experience. And if we're not really talking amongst each other as well, there's a lot of shame, which is why it's so important that I'm on this stage, because I'm destigmatizing talking about it. And that's what we need in order for survivors to feel emboldened to step forward. So throughout that process of reporting, I did have counselling, but the counselling kind of stopped the year that I'd reported. I had maybe 10 sessions with the psychologist. I didn't have any more sessions after that. I didn't receive any further counselling, neither did my mum, neither did my siblings, which is why I also support the recommendation for a statewide referral process, triaged through the statewide sexual assault services to local sexual assault services. This is so important. I've only realised now as an adult how much of a difference having counselling throughout primary school, like I was 5 years old when that investigation occurred. If I'd had counselling throughout primary school and so had my siblings, so had my mum, our lives would have looked so much different, so much different. I often wonder if my abuse would have been handled differently on the criminal side of things as well. My mum hadn't been told about the supports that were available to her when giving evidence. And I don't really think that the police considered what they should have told my mum. I felt like it was a bit of a rushed process. But this is why I also support a task force for implementing the right to closed courtrooms, giving evidence remotely, recording that evidence, that audiovisual evidence for use later on in subsequent hearings. This is also why I support First Nations families having access to First Nations court advocates, forensic examination staff, and children's champions. I often wonder if the police had told my mum, this is how your child can give evidence. There are other culturally responsive, culturally safe ways that a child can give evidence, whether she wouldn't have felt so guilty and so racked with anxiety at the thought of me on the stand, that maybe she would have said, okay, like, let's talk about the options. But she was never afforded that opportunity because the question was never asked, which is not her fault or any survivor's fault. It's the role of the authorities. So here I am today, having experienced that and then having proceeded through the Queensland court. My father, the abuser, took my mum to court for visitation in Queensland. And it was during that process that I sat opposite an advocate that I wasn't introduced to. And that advocate proceeded on behalf of my perpetrator to ask me why I didn't want to see him. And my response was, he abused me. He vehemently denied it. She was in shock. She had no idea. And this is why I support the integration of services and that wraparound support and communication between police, state and territory services. It's not just about each state, it's inside the state, it's about each state communicating. I am here today as a survivor advocate who decided that what happened to me should never happen to anyone else. I have studied psychology and law as a double degree. I'm about to graduate, and I've also been awarded a 2022 Churchill Fellowship. And my research will involve, thank you. I'm traveling to 5 countries at the end of this year, investigating trauma-informed approaches to legal processes so that I can ensure that Indigenous folks like myself, people with disabilities, people in the queer community, they have access to support that is relevant to them, that is safe for them. It's my dream to train up legal practitioners and advocates so that we are able to access the justice system in a way that is relevant to us, in a way that feels safe for us. So when I return, I'll write a big report and I'll share that with the community. But fundamentally, what I want to do is I want to visit psychologists and lawyers and find out what's working around the world and bring that back. And give that to our community because we deserve that. And the system right now isn't working. So with that, I say thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for giving me the platform to share my story today. And I'm really excited to hear the panel. Thank you.
Right. That doesn't fire you up. I don't know what will. What an amazing woman. And when you do come back, if government doesn't hire you as policy advisor to implement that, they're mad. Another round of applause, please, for Amanda. Right. Let's get to the forum, shall we? So I'm going to invite the guests up one by one. Please take a seat wherever you like. So first, the Honourable Natalie Ward, MLC, Liberal Party. Greg Harrison, MP, Australian Labor Party. Abigail Boyd, MLC, the Greens. Let's keep clapping. Mark Ramazia, MLC, Students and Farmers Party, Alison Waters, Animal Justice Party. Now, I have what I have, you've got one. Right? Let's start to get through in a very short period of time. And first, we're going to do quick intros. Okay, so it's 2-minute intros. To keep it short, sharp, remember, this is about people like who you are to begin with, and after that, it's about your party when you stand and what you think the solution should be moving forward. So we'll start with Natalie.
Glen Rosen, can I acknowledge that we meet on Durham land and thank the custodians of this land for sharing this magnificent nation, most homelanders, multicultural nation in the world, and thank them for sharing with us and acknowledge Aboriginal people of Israel. Thank you, Amanda Rosen, for everybody that's brought us together. This is so important for this discussion. Natalie Ward, Minister for Women's Safety and the Prevention of Domestic and Sexual Violence. My aim is to myself out of the job, but while I am here, I'm so very grateful for all of you being here, sharing this discussion and the incredible opportunity we have to work with amazing advocates and my colleagues, and I acknowledge my incredible parliamentary colleagues who are absolutely devoted to ensuring that we end violence. And I'm just so privileged to have the opportunity to share with you all today. I can also thank the advocates that we work so closely with in various ministerial councils and through the big bodies, Delia and all of your work. I won't start acknowledging individuals because of their whole own, but thank you for all you're doing. And our job is to work together. I'll talk about our specific policies, but we're the first government to have a dedicated minister for women's safety and prevention of domestic violence. It's a priority of ours, and we're throwing everything.
Jodie,
I'm Jodie Harrison. I am the Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. And Shadow Minister for Women, Shadow Minister for Seniors. I would also like to in the country, custodians of the land, around other dark people. I come from a lot of the land, it's my home electorate, and I also pay respects to a lot of people. I am going to be today, and I will always be totally honest with you. Speaking in preparation for today, I've been speaking with both Michael Daly, our Shadow Attorney General, and the Shadow Police Minister, Paul Scully, and that's what their intention is to. If we say something to you, we will go through with it, but we'll also tell you where we can't go through what we can achieve. I just like to thank Women's Alliance for putting this on, the experience and the knowledge that you've given me for sharing my experience and knowledge, and of course others have also spoken to me. And particularly I want to thank the numbers of people who came along to I know we had in the parliamentary theatre last year in October, services, the Chris Menz and Kate Washington, Brian Palmer, Shadow Minister, and Michael Daly. What we got out of that was incredibly important.
you're the experts on the ground. It's important to listen to you, and it's important to what that's your experiences and what your needs are. In government, I think it's important that we have government that looks like the people that it represents. And which means Labor.
10 seconds.
Yep, Labor Party, 45% of our MPs are currently women, 48% of our cabinet are women, and 48% of candidates in our seats are women. That reflects who we are and what our commitment will be in relation to domestic violence issues.
Thank you. Abigail.
Thank you, and I also acknowledge that we are meeting here on Aboriginal land and also pay my respects. That was President Emerging acknowledged that this land wasn't always will be Aboriginal land, and also acknowledge the additional obstacles and discrimination prejudice that First Nations people face in this country because of racism and institutionalised racism, but also the sexism when it comes to domestic and family violence within First Nations communities. I am going to say something totally different to what I was going to say before. So I am the Greens portfolio holder for domestic violence and abuse, and I have been for the past 4 years. After listening to you, Amanda, as a victim of child sexual assault, I was a little triggered during, not your fault, but as you know, it happens. And I think it again just brings out for me how important it is, and as Joe just said, to have people in Parliament who actually represent the community, and some of us are victim survivors, and that I think brings an important perspective. And I've been criticised in the last year or so by some of our right-wing MPs for basically telling me I shouldn't be in Parliament because I have I have trauma and I'm a product of child sexual assault. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that, to say thank you so much for bringing your voice, and it underlines again just how important it is that we actually listen to victim survivors and we listen to experts. And I get so frustrated that time after time we come to things like this and we know what we need to do. And so the Greens support everything in your platform because it is evidence-based. And if anyone tells you they can't support it, it's because they don't prioritise it in the budget. And that's not good enough, and it's time to pull back.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge traditional custodians of land in which we meet. Just a little bit about myself before I got into this bizarre job. Being a politician, I was a secondary deputy principal and high school teacher. So I acknowledge the comments about the importance of education, and I know the trauma that some of our kids come, witnessing and experiencing that domestic and sexual violence at home. And there needs to be more done about that coordination in terms of how we identify, how we work with the kids, how we work with them to, get through that trauma and come out the other side. And there isn't enough done on that coordination. I know as a deputy principal, we led a evidence-based trauma professional learning, but we were operating as one of those silos. So that there definitely needs to be more done in that space. There definitely needs to be more done around school counselling. Most of the school counsellors that we have now are getting pretty close to retirement. So there needs to be more done to attract highly qualified people into that space for sure. I guess from my party perspective, we come from a party that is pushing for greater resources, greater investments in the bush, in our rural and remote areas. And I acknowledge the fact that there are some unique challenges in delivering services and actually hitting the mark and delivering real world outcomes in those rural and remote areas. We know that a lot of the services that are offered in those areas, the people that are working in those areas, they know the victim, but they also know the perpetrator, which obviously makes it very difficult. We are also big on accountability. I think we need to make it clear that we're as a party, we don't write the checks, but what we do is we keep whichever major party is in power, we hold them to account to make sure that not only the money is delivered, but it actually delivers outcomes. Because I think it's not good enough just to throw a check, throw a check out there and walk away. And unfortunately, that is happening.
Thank you. And Alison?
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Darug people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. And I want to thank Amanda, and I look forward to reading your report. My name is Alison Waters. I'm the Animal Justice Party's lead candidate for the Upper House. I live in Lismore, a town that experienced catastrophic flooding a year ago and whose people and animals are still recovering. I've supported and advocated for women, children and animals who experience domestic and family violence for over 20 years. Until recently, I was the manager of a women's domestic violence service in the Northern Rivers. I want to thank the New South Wales Women's Alliance for the opportunity to share with you today what the Animal Justice Party will do to make New South Wales a safe place for people and animals. Working alongside DV New South Wales and the New South Wales Women's Alliance, the Animal Justice Party achieved important reforms. Animals are now included on apprehended domestic violence orders, and animal abuse is now recognised as a form of domestic violence in the legislation. We secured vital funding for services that work with people and animals experiencing violence. Recently, we achieved domestic violence and child protection training for RSPCA and animal welfare league inspectors, who may be the first people to enter a home where domestic violence is being perpetrated. Inspectors will have the skills to recognise, respond and refer. We are in the process of developing legislation that would empower magistrates to make animal custody orders in the name of the protected person at the same time as granting an ADVO. This will ensure that a woman is able to leave a violent partner and take the animals with her. We are pushing for crisis veterinary care and accommodation for animals who are victims of domestic and family violence, and for domestic violence training for vets, who, like inspectors, may be the first people to come into contact with women who are at risk. And I'm happy to announce that we support all recommendations of the New South Wales Women's Alliance election platform and look forward to working with you, the sector, to end gender-based violence and make New South Wales a safe state.
Thank you, everyone. For you all, because it'll be 2 minutes to respond. I want everyone to have a chance to respond to the questions. It's going to be 2 minutes each. I will let you know if it's 10 seconds left, so you can speak really fast or pick the most powerful response or policy in relation to the question. And it's about your party, not another person. Okay, so I'll start from here. I'll start with you, Natalie. Now, New South Wales, the community in general in New South Wales and must say Australia, we have a greater understanding of sexual domestic family violence than 10 years ago. And I think women speaking up, and you're a perfect example, Amanda, of being brave to speak up so other people feel they can as well, which is very powerful. Now, it's resulted in more people than ever needing support. However, funding isn't matching this demand because often we're ashamed into saying humiliating, and now we're encouraging each other and saying, no, that behaviour is wrong. They didn't even know that we're in a situation like that. So people are catching on. However, is there the funding, or isn't the funding to match the services required? And the more we look at it, the more we need help. So how does your particular party plan to ensure that especially the supporting adults and children impacted by domestic and family violence and sexual violence have adequate resources to meet demand, not just now, but moving forward?
Thank you, and can I also acknowledge, thank you so much, Amanda, for your story. It's vitally important to share it. I've come from having practiced in representing child sexual abuse victims, and so I absolutely understand how brave you've been today and how much to continue to be. This is the government that has a dedicated ministry in this role. Domestic violence and the prevention of domestic and sexual violence is a priority for us. We have provided more state funding than ever before. I'll try to keep it to 2 minutes. But this is not only our legislative response in terms of our Australia First coercive control legislation, which I see Queensland is about to follow. We know that coercive control is a red flag for domestic violence homicide. We know that it's there, and so that landmark legislation has been brought in by this government. Our affirmative consent legislation and Make No Doubt campaign are preventative responses to ensuring that we are leading the nation post response in terms of funding. Our core and cluster program for housing, crisis accommodation, where there is a core of services and a cluster of homes around it,
There are 86 women's shelters in New South Wales. We are almost doubling that number to 75. So another 2,900 women and their children will have a safe space to recover and rebuild their lives. That is $500 million. That is record funding in New South Wales. What does that mean? That means there are more safe spaces across the state. We've heard the challenges in regional and remote areas are culturally appropriate, and they are a number of those are run by Aboriginal controlled community organisations in culturally safe place-based. We have a dedicated First Women's Safety Commissioner, which I've just appointed in New South Wales, and we have record funding to ensure that our Staying Home Leaving Violence program. So if you choose not to leave the home, you want to stay there, we will support you to do that. We have increased that funding so that you can remove the perpetrator and you stay there. There's so much more we are doing in terms of the justice system, which I'll talk about, working with police, working with community health, to make sure that we're nuancing our responses. And just recently, our multicultural fund, so we're specifically targeting and hearing about the sector's needs to have nuanced approaches. We're going to fund that specifically. I have 2 councils that advise me regularly, and I'm really pleased that those bodies are giving us that advice on the ground every day. But I can say that this is a government that's absolutely committed to currently not only legislating but in funding and supporting specialist homelessness services.
Okay, so Jodie, you're next. You get 2.5 minutes. And
I can say welcome at the start. We're all girls. You can get an email.
No, I didn't. In that WhatsApp group.
I want to acknowledge that there's been a huge focus in society in the last few years, and there has been significant commitment in the last few years from the government, and we will recognise good work on that stuff. In government, what we would do different is that we would make sure that all services who provide support to domestic violence and sexual assault survivors are on at least 5-year contracts. At the moment, they might be only between 12 months to 3 years to 4 years, some 5 years, but we're looking at everybody over a 5-year contract. We'll establish a task force to make sure that, that there's a new funding framework and a jobs contract to make sure that there's not a race to the bottom on what people get paid who work in the sector, so keeping people working within the sector. We'll also double Women's Health Centre funding across New South Wales. 80% of people who walk into a Women's Health Centre has experienced some form of domestic violence or sexual assault throughout their lives. We will increase sexual violence helpline, sexual violence helplines funding by nearly $1 million per annum for 5 years at least. And that will allow them to provide an additional 25 counsellors, so they won't be missing the 1 in 3 phone calls they currently miss to people who make calls to that number. We will provide a new multicultural domestic and family violence centre in southwestern suburb of Sydney, in conjunction with the 7 Services International. That will be aimed at providing best practice support to migrant and refugee women, but also importantly, rolling that out to other services who don't have the specialist workers in that area, to bring everybody, all services together, to provide support to those people. We'll create an independent victim services commissioner, so that we don't have to go through problematic process there. And yesterday we announced $2 million to purchase land for Women's Recovery Trauma Centre.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, and you want me to repeat the question? No. Okay, you've got to.
So yeah, I'm yet to meet anybody in working in the domestic family violence sector who thinks that they have sufficient funding. And I think we can talk about funding being increased, and it's great that we could give an extra $100 million to women's health centres after they haven't had any sort of actual increase in their funding for the past 25 odd years. But the reality is that these services are horribly underfunded. And then in addition, we make people jump through these hoops to get every little bit of funding and grants to such an extent that a lot of services are spending significant numbers of staff hours in filling out grant applications and trying to get funding is unacceptable. Very happy to see Labor also adopting our 5-year funding strategy. We would say 5 years as a standard contract term, but 7 years for regional and 10 years for rural services for obvious reasons. So I think yes, but absolutely, in addition to that, we need workforce strategy commitments. We need to be actually looking at things like the portability of entitlements and things like that. But fundamentally, we need more funding. And it really annoys me, as I said at the beginning, when we're talking about, 2 million here, 100 million there, when we're giving 20 million a year to, greyhound racing prizes, and we're allowing the coal exporters to get away without paying $8 billion a year that we would otherwise get if we were, in Queensland. There is money that we can use if we think that domestic violence is a priority. The Greens do think it is a priority. We're fed up of it not being dealt with. And so we would, absolutely support every single aspect. We supported Safe State for exactly the same reason. These are modest funds, but not very much money. We could make a significant difference to domestic violence in the state.
Okay.
Thank you. Look, as I said earlier, we can't, promise endless amounts of money, but obviously what we can promise is that we'll hold the government to account in terms of delivery of that money and making sure it's spent wisely, spent well. Obviously, the industry does need more money. It has been poorly funded for decades and decades and decades. It's been evident when I've travelled out west, where a town like Walton has 5 domestic violence centres, 5 NGOs working in that space, but some of them can't even afford to pay a security guard, in their refuges. So those women go and seek help, seek to leave, and then they can't actually feel safe even in the refuge because there's no security guard at night keeping them safe from the perpetrator. So things like that need to change. We need a better funding model. There needs to be that continuity of funding, and that's something that we as a party support. We support better coordination of resources. Enough of this working in silos, not just the industry, but the government departments as well. Like I know as a deputy principal trying to work with these government departments to coordinate resources, and they said they were open to coordinating resources, but then produced a 15-page application for parents and kids to access that resource. It's just nonsensical. So we need to make the process simple. We need to make it accessible for everybody. I guess, as I said, we're a party that holds the government to account. So, one thing that we have done in that space is the domestic violence assessment tool. We've been holding the government to account on reworking that. It's not acceptable that a victim of domestic violence is then subjected to a 3-4 hour interrogation when the data and the research shows that we cut down to between 5 and 10 questions in terms of identifying the risks of becoming a victim again. So I look forward to hearing whether we've got anywhere on that space from the Minister, because last time I checked, the police were dragging the chain of that. And I think when we talk about accountability, we also need to talk about the accountability of the people we put in charge of keeping us safe and looking after us. There's been some very tragic examples where police have cataclysmically failed. So they also need to be held accountable for their inaction or poor decisions.
So having worked in the sector, I know how under-resourced it is, particularly in rural, regional and remote areas. I confirm again that we do support all of the election asks. I particularly want to mention the minimum 5-year funding contracts, because we know that services need the funding certainty to be able to do your strategic planning and to be able to retain specialist staff. We need increased funding for specialist services for children and young people. Children are not adjuncts to their mother's experience of violence. They deserve their own individualised support, and the services that provide that need to be adequately resourced so that they can attract the specialist staff that they need. I support increased funding and resourcing to strengthen trauma-informed practice.
And I know that we must support you, the workers, this workforce, because you support the most vulnerable people in our communities. Your work is complex. You may experience vicarious trauma, you risk burnout, and you deserve to be appropriately recognised and compensated for this through your wages, your conditions, the training that you receive, your professional development, your supervision. You deserve the technology and equipment that you need. You deserve appropriate infrastructure, comfortable offices, appropriate staffing levels. And I know that some of my colleagues at Northern Rivers DV has wanted to join this session today, but most of them will be on the phones doing the work. They'll be at court today. I know how important the work is that you do and how under-resourced you are, and I will fight to change that.
Thank you. Maybe you all up for a question, was well. So the next one is about, and this really, we all know someone, 100%, we all know someone who's been affected by this. So domestic and family violence is the single largest driver of homelessness for women and children. There is even less housing available for priority cohorts such as Aboriginal women and women over 55 and women with a disability. So, given that there is approximately 50,000 people in the waiting list for social housing, with 5,000 on the priority waiting list, and I must just flag that there are a lot of women out there that are not even speaking about this, or about this, so therefore, probably times 10 to be honest. How much additional social housing is your party committed to building so women and children do not have to choose between homelessness and abuse? And we'll start with Jodie.
Firstly, let me say, in my electorate office, numbers of people who walk in who are experiencing homelessness or are at risk of homelessness has been rapidly increasing. Staff see that, I see that. An 18-year-old young man walk in who's just leaving guardianship, who is about to come home. 55-year-old woman, 57-year-old woman who's been living in the same room for 8 years. Her landlord has just turfed her out, and she's got a disabled son in his 50s. I see that, which is why that what we have done as Labor is actually develop a comprehensive plan to increase housing and the stability of rental sites in this state. In government, what we'll do is we would actually do an audit of all government owned land and what we list for residential development. 30% at a minimum of what we need, what would be released for residential development will be reserved for affordable social housing. And then on top of that, we would have dedicated social housing frequency. So we'll get rid of the Housing Corporation and combine that in with a new Housing New South Wales organisation, so that there can be no more buck shoving between that and Housing Corporation, which I know what often happens. And to work with the federal government in their Housing Australia Future Fund to deliver more social housing in New South Wales. We will provide real rental reform to increase tenants' rights. We will abolish no grounds evictions. We will allow pets in rentals, and we know that that's a huge area in the domestic violence space. We've established a rental commissioner, and we will have a new program to develop to deliver affordable rental accommodation in New South Wales, and we're developing a trial in the South Coast to do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay,
Thank you. Housing is first and foremost a home, not a commodity. And when you look at the last 30 years of treating housing like a commodity, it is no surprise that we now have the housing crisis that we're in now. You need to take action at both the supply and the demand side. Everybody seems very reluctant to end the tax breaks for investors. Everyone seems very reluctant to make developers have to rent out empty properties. We have to not only be building massive amounts of public housing supply, and we, the Greens, have a commitment to 10,000 houses being built every year for the next 10 years. And again, people say, oh, how are you going to pay for that? Well, I could find you an easy 15 bill Just talking right now, from the big end of town, from the property developers, from the fossil fuel industry, from the gambling industry, from the big banks, it's not actually that hard if you have a commitment to getting revenue out of the top end of town. So with $3 billion, we could build that 10,000 homes every year and begin to make a dent. But we also need to be doing those supply side, the supply side measures. So in terms of the rental stuff, you know, absolutely, we've been lobbying for a very long time and making inroads on the rental stuff. In New South Wales Parliament, we would immediately introduce a rent freeze and then set up a process for how to get those rents back under control. We'd end no grounds evictions. We'd introduce minimum standards in rental accommodation, including energy efficiency measures, internet access, etc. Strengthen the rights of tenants to enable long-term leases. Allow people to transfer their bonds from one property to another. Let renters have pets. And ensure adequate penalties for landlords who are breaching the responsibilities for tenants. So, you know, similarly, I welcome everything that Joe just said in terms of Labor's position on 30% affordability in bits of I guess new developments. But I want to see a more holistic approach to dealing with this housing crisis.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think we first need to acknowledge that being homeless is not necessarily just living rough on the street. It includes things like couch surfing, staying at relatives or other family members or friends. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. Well, yes, obviously supply is an issue, something that we've been banging on about as a party for a long time. It's okay to dangle the carrot in terms of subsidies for homeowners and stuff like that, in terms of stamp duty, etc. You have different ways to pay stamp duty, but unless you fix the supply issue, you won't fix the housing crisis. So the promise of building houses is great. Promise of money to build houses is great, but we also need to work on our planning levers that allows us to actually do that a lot quicker. Now we've passed legislation in last government about building better water infrastructure in our west. So we all know water is life, but having a safe home for someone that's a domestic violence victim, that's life too. So if we can change the planning levers to build water infrastructure a lot quicker, a lot faster, I'm sure as well we can do it for social housing and affordable housing. So in terms of what we'll commit to, in terms of how much houses you need, as much as you bloody want and need is what we commit to. If it's 5,000, it's 5,000, it's 10,000, it's 10,000. Let's just get on with it. I think in 2021, the government promised $500 million. Would that be in comparison to the impact of domestic violence in the state? 24 billion potentially impacts this state. So we've clearly got the proportionality wrong in terms of funding this issue. So, greater investment obviously in building these houses, but let's move to the point. Let's manipulate some planning levers so we can actually get the houses to the quicker for the people that need them the most.
Thank you.
So this is a huge issue in the Northern Rivers where I live. We already had a housing crisis in Lismore before the floods. We were facing low vacancy rates and skyrocketing rents. And the situation was really tough as well for women who might be trying to rent with animals who are escaping violence. In Lismore and across the Northern Rivers, many people are still displaced. They're not in their homes, or if they're in their home, they're living in a shell of a home. A lot of our affordable housing was destroyed in the flood, so it is a really difficult situation right now in the Northern Rivers for women who are trying to leave a violent partner. We know that everyone has the right to safe, secure and affordable housing. We support setting targets to increase the supply of social and affordable housing, and we support amendments to tenancy laws to prohibit no grounds evictions and limit rent increases. And we support an increase in funding for specialist homelessness, social and legal services that support people who are homeless or are at risk of homelessness. And we also want to make it easier for people to rent with pets. We will also advocate for amendments to tax laws and policy to increase the availability and affordability of housing at the federal level.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, thank you. And no, it is a huge topic. Everyone knows that. It's front and
centre across this nation, we need more housing. I'm not alone in this, and we know that a safe home is absolutely essential to recovery and rebuilding. That's the right of every Australian. In our approach, when we came to government, there was a huge backlog in housing, and we have, as a state, there are 158,000 social housing homes, and we've increased that by 9%, which is more than double the national average of 4%. Do we have a long way to go? Absolutely. Are we ahead of other states in the nation? Absolutely. Do we need an innovative approach? Of course. Have we trained people funding it? Yes. So it's not as simple as just saying we'll double or triple it. You actually need to find places to build them and build them. We heard from the sector, which is where our advice comes from, that the priority was crisis accommodation. That's why we're almost doubling the number of shelters in New South Wales to provide that first stop for recovery, which is self-contained, which is safe and secure. If you look at the premises at Orange, it's absolutely safe, Mark, and it's pleasing that we're rolling that out. The next stage, of course, is a forever home. And in New South Wales, we have $1.2 billion going to those services, and partnering with community housing providers who are specialists. What's needed in Orange is quite different from what's needed on the coast or in Sydney and the CBD. We know that. Listening to local communities and working closely with them, but putting that funding in to ensure that those community housing providers and specialist homes and services are supported is absolutely what we're doing. That is happening on the ground right now. We know that specialist homes and services are best placed to be providing that work, which is why we work so closely with them. And we have also backed that in with our first home via strategy for domestic violence victim survivors. So should you wish to buy your own home, we will afford those things as well. Also, interest-free loans for bonds. So getting that bond together to rent a place is incredibly challenging. Ensuring that we will help you get that first step to find that place in any rental assistance property, we will do as well. There is a lot happening. There's a lot more to do, but we've doubled our investment in this, and it's easy to talk about it. It's hard to deliver it, but we're absolutely committed to it, which is why we have that record investment across New South Wales and the nation.
Thank you. Okay, round of applause for the answers to that one. The next question is actually something that popped up quite a lot through discussion today, and I touched on it, and Anita touched on it, and panel about policing. So policing and legal responses in New South Wales are inconsistent and can be unsafe, resulting in many women experiencing violence, choosing not to report. So a lot of women avoid going. I've heard stories with friends who've had personal experience with it. I think I'm not going to bother with this. And also they've seen a traumatic experience with a friend or a family member go through the system and think, wow, is it really worth it? And they're putting their lives at stake at other times in their future. So we'll start with Abigail. What will your party do to improve policing and court responses so they are safer for people who have experienced sexual, family and domestic violence?
Yeah, really, really important piece of the puzzle. Our police and justice systems are plagued by not only sexism, racism, and also ignorance and conflicts of interest. So whether it's police investigating police, people within the judicial system misunderstanding and misidentifying the motives of victims and perpetrators, it's rife. And I think one of the things that we cautioned and that the sector very clearly cautioned during the coercive control debate was that you cannot introduce legislation on top of a system like that and expect it to have the results that's intended under your legislation. You absolutely need to invest in training and reforming the system that you overlay any change to. So in addition to committing to you, again, that in the next term of Parliament, I will do everything I can to fix the faulty coercive control legislation that was introduced last year to make it fit for purpose, which it can be. I also commit to doing everything we can do to investigate that police and judicial system. So in the last term of Parliament, we managed to get an inquiry into looking at the family law system, the interaction with child protection, to try and really begin to unpick the re-traumatising effect and also the terrible negative consequences that can come out when a judicial system does not understand domestic and family violence properly. In the next term of Parliament, we want to have an inquiry similar to what we've seen in Queensland that really investigates exactly what is happening with the police response in New South Wales to domestic and family violence, markers, gaps, people coming into talk to us about their experiences. And it is not good. We absolutely, as a party, believe in evidence-based policy. To do that, you need to have the evidence in front of you. That's why we're very keen on having an inquiry in front of that, in relation to that, and why we continue to push the police to more adequately collect data and report data about what they're seeing.
Thank you. Hey, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. I guess probably important to acknowledge that it's not always the police that are the first people that have this reported to. So I think we need an actual consistent approach across all sectors in terms of training, in terms of how we respond to reports. I know as a former teacher, there was a lot of accidental disclosure, so for want of a better word. So I think all sectors need to be trained in how to do this respectfully, because it needs to be a consistent approach across all of it. As I said, we're committed to holding the government to account on a lot of this stuff. So I'll continue holding the government to account on that domestic violence assessment until we actually see the police will figure out their backside and actually come on board with doing that in a better way. I think we also need to recognise that these reports of domestic violence can happen at any time of the day. So we need everyone trained. Everyone in that police station needs to be trained in terms of how to do this respectfully. It shouldn't be a case of you know come back when it's 9 to 5, because often these things happen in the dead of the night or when a lot of other facilities are closed. So we need to make sure everyone is trained, regardless of their position in the police, to do this respectfully. Once again, we're holding the police to account when they get things wrong, because they have, the classic example with the John Edwards situation. No one from the firearms registry has actually been held accountable for what they even did. Yes, he was he was held responsible ultimately, but there was some cataclysmic failings of the firearms registry. They enabled him to do what he did. And unfortunately, no one from the firearms registry has been held accountable for what was criminal negligence. So we will continue to pursue the government and the police when they stuff things up, because if they're not held accountable for the mistakes will continue to happen.
I love the word accountability. It's my favorite word.
Obviously, this is a critical issue. Over the years, I've spoken to countless women who've told me about the poor and inadequate responses that they've received from police. And in some cases, beyond that, disrespectful and damaging. And I know that you will have all heard them as well. It is essential that police are trained appropriately so that when they respond to people who've experienced sexual, domestic and family violence, they can respond in a safe, supportive and consistent way. It shouldn't differ depending on which police officer you speak to or which station you happen to turn up to. Training is obviously vital. I would argue that cultural change is essential as well. We know that police need to understand how to correctly identify who the person in need of protection is and who the primary aggressor is. The violent person is. It is critical that police have an understanding of how trauma presents. So how it may impact on the demeanour or the behaviour of a woman that they're talking to. We support improvements to the court system, from infrastructure improvements such as audio-visual facilities and safe waiting areas, to training and resourcing for court staff and judicial officers. Women's domestic violence court advocacy services must be embedded into court practice. They are a vital service for supporting women in their interactions with police and also in the court system.
Wonderful, thank you. Natalie.
Well, thank you. As a former practitioner and legal assistant having acted for sexual abuse victims, I know the importance of trauma-informed practice. That has informed my advocacy with government and our response. We have announced already that we're looking into a dedicated domestic violence court. We're going to be working that in the meantime. We have 5 additional magistrates to be dealing with the backlog in the court system. We know that when you take that brave decision to come forward, those who are 5 minutes for a court, that we need to wrap around you with that critical thing of
That's why we're giving 10 years of funding to Full Stop Australia to ensure that funding is there for the next 10 years. That's in the budget. That's not an election commitment. It's $1 million every year for the next 10 years done, so that you have that support at that time critically. We know in the court system that it can be re-traumatising, which is why we already have safe witness rooms. We have the presumption that a domestic violence complainant can give evidence remotely or in a safe witness room. We have child sexual abuse victims can give pre-recorded evidence, and we have funded WD as women's domestic violence services extensively. We know that we need to walk beside you in that journey. But I know from practice that the court system is not perfect, which is why we are looking at dedicated domestic violence lists, so that everybody from the court officer at the front desk through to the magistrate and everybody in there is aware of trauma-informed practice. We want you to do the best evidence. We want that to happen quickly and efficiently, and we want that perpetrator to account very quickly and efficiently. That's why we work closely with the police, and I accept that the police are not always to blame, but we can do a whole lot in terms of education to ensure that if you're brave enough to walk through that front door, the general duties officers are all who have been dealing with has that training. That's why we have $5.2 million for education in the police and control space, and given the time to ensure that we're working closely with and to educate police and reassure that that is our first response. We have a comprehensive response at every opportunity, but Lieutenant General and it's one now and need going forward to absolutely reform communities and work closely with police to do that. We have announced a range of those options and beginning regular funding to see it through. Thank you. And Jeremy. The question was about improving policing and court responses. And we've got 16,500 police in New South Wales. They as well. Having said that, the Auditor General brought down a report about police responses into and the way they responded to domestic violence complaints, and that, to say the least, wasn't exactly flattering about the systems, the skills that police have. There are a lot of recommendations which need to be implemented, and we would certainly, other than making sure that we work towards doing that. I think the other thing is that the role of the elected government is to ensure that there are systems in place that are robust, to ensure where there is, to reduce the likelihood of humans not complying with what they should be doing. So Michael Daly has shadowed to the General, Paul Scully, Shadow Police Minister, and I have an extremely good working relationship to make sure that those three areas will be working together to make sure that recommendations are specialist DD courts are really what we actually taken that as a policy to the last two elections. We've heard very clearly that the courts need to be safe spaces for domestic violence and sexual assault survivors. Certainly have more to say on that in coming weeks. We've also heard very clearly that the co-location pilot that's being undertaken with WVB CAS and police stations is anecdotally working well. There's review and there's some reports to come through on that about how that's actually playing out. But I understand that the really good. The same with the WVB CAS for hearing support. The CASs are currently unfunded for the initial the listing, not the actual hearing process. And from what I'm hearing, those WVB CAS hearing support programs are doing really, really well, and we'll be looking for more in that space.
Thank you. And a round of applause. We have a very important question, and it will start with
people's to lead the change in their own communities.
Well, thank you. It's a fantastic question. Thank you, Amanda. So each of our ministers in our government have in our charter letter the responsibility to prioritise closing the gap. We meet regularly with CAPO and organisations directly in each of our portfolio responsibilities to ensure we have that accountability, and I absolutely welcome that and have an employer working closely with them. In terms of our core and cluster program for refugees, we have plenty of those designated as Aboriginal controlled community organisations run, and we have provided $20 million in funding for capacity building for the sector to ensure that not only are there more people encouraged to start to run these organisations, but we're helping them to apply for grants, we're helping them to seek success in capacity building in the sector. We know and have heard loud and clear that that is needed. So addressing that on the ground, well, I know that local communities know what they need best, and so listening to them, absolutely right, Mark, listening to those communities and letting them tell us and tell their future what it is that they need may differ vastly in different communities. We've prioritised that with the Call One project. I was down with Wilminda in the South Coast recently, ensuring that those and particular organisations are running their local programs. And it was so pleasing to see Wilminda from everywhere we went in the South Coast was amazing. But working closely with them to listen, having them at the table as we do in the councils around the tables, prioritising funding for local communities to decide what it is that they need as a priority is a very clear priority of ours. And so working closely with, but listening to and working together with Aboriginal controlled community organisations ensuring their own control. And they are at the helm of driving our workforce participation, our responses, our community housing, our homelessness services. We're wrapping around them in a culturally safe way and a place-based way.
I think I just want to go back to first principles on this, and Labor will establish a treaty process with First Nation people in New South Wales. That is incredibly important, I think. But we need to establish a way, consultation process, and we've committed to this, a consultation process with First Nations people to inform us with the blueprint for what the treaty process will do the first 2 months. We also know that Aboriginal-led and controlled organisations have better outcomes for our First Nations people than we have those meaningful partnerships with our Aboriginal control organisations in the domestic violence and sexual assault space. The 20 core and cluster units that have been identified to be provided by Aboriginal-led control organisations are incredibly important. I really hope that we actually achieve that. It's important that we do. It'll be really good to see those numbers actually announce the foreign cluster locating them and exactly what they look like. So I'll be making sure that any support that is needed to provide those 20 foreign cluster organisations is actually provided.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the really important question. I think, again, the Greens support every aspect of the Women's Alliance package, including in relation to dedicated services for First Nations people, and we absolutely support increased funding for Aboriginal community controlled organisations. In the interest of time, though, I'd like to just, I guess, reflect on the decision-making aspect of this, because I think we talk a lot about including First Nations people in decisions on the issues that matter to them, which is everything. But we very rarely actually take into account what is then, I guess, the feedback that then comes back. I'm really pleased to see Labor's policy for treaties. The Greens have long supported a treaties process. We also are taking to this election basically a policy of dedicated seats in Parliament, so that it's not just a consultation, but dedicated force in our Parliament. I think it's great that we are finally beginning to acknowledge that we've gone to a top-down approach, and that Aboriginal communities should be able to actually determine their own existence, and I think that's fantastic. But that doesn't mean we can just ignore all of the racist and systemic burdens and hurdles that are set up in the rest of the system. And so I think it's really important that we acknowledge that if you're a woman experiencing domestic violence and you're also First Nations woman, the chances of your children being taken off of you, if you actually raise that with the authorities, the chances of your partner finding themselves dead when they're put in custody for basically just calling off. This is a vastly different situation to non-First Nations people. And I think that until we get those bits right, we will never get the rest of it right.
Thank you. Round of applause for the time. One more question. Hi, I'm Nina Kagootli from Muslim Women Australia. We've been operating frontline domestic and family violence services for over 30 years, and we really look forward to working with each and every one of you in any of your capacity to continue to make sure we do the best work possible for women and children and communities experiencing violence. My question is, how will we ensure that every local, culturally specific community in New South Wales will be supported to end gender-based violence in one generation with respect to specialised experience?
That's the question. Thanks. I acknowledge that Women's Alliance and the sector have identified strategies to address prevention and promote gender equality. And if elected, I will act on those. I acknowledge your expertise. An intersectional approach tells us that no single initiative will be of relevance to all groups impacted by violence. It is essential that we resource local initiatives and programs that are evidence-based and adapted to an individual group's context and circumstance. The establishment of a lived expertise advisory group can represent a number of diverse groups to the New South Wales Government. I also want to affirm that I will work with the sector to create a safe New South Wales, as I said earlier, for people and animals. We know there is a link between animal abuse and domestic violence, and as long as our society tolerates abuse against animals, people will also be at risk. So I think this is a prevention issue that we can't ignore.
We'll go to those.
Thank you, and thank you, Nat, for all of your work, Settlement Services International, all of the incredible groups, non-profit groups that work closely with Women's Alliance and Domestic Violence New South Wales to inform our approach. As a former Minister for Horticulturalism in New South Wales, I'm very well aware of the cultural elements and the nuances that we absolutely have to acknowledge. Communities, as I always say, communities know their communities best, and we must listen to them We've recently announced a specific, having listened to feedback from the sector in relation to multicultural communities, domestic violence experience, a specific multicultural grants program for ongoing or new, deliberately rewind ongoing programs or new programs, because we heard that sector specifically needed some support, and so we're very pleased to announce that grants up $150,000. But our ongoing engagement with these organisations performing their ongoing work is also something we do as a matter of business as usual. Because we know the incredible work that is done, by communities who are part of culturally appropriate, culturally safe nuances for their communities. And we know that there is much more to do in that space, but recognising the special services that are brought and the safety of a woman coming forward to an organisation that understands her cultural needs is absolutely critical in our media response. It's coming up anyway. Recognising the difficulties with temporary visa holders, recognising the difficulties with wider family and cultural issues that may play out in the community. He was very brave and was criticised for years for speaking out and has done so much led the way. So it is brave women leaders in their communities that lead, and that's why I've worked closely with religious and multi-faith leaders recently to agree that it's all about that multi-faith leaders in those communities also play an incredibly important role. So recognising those, ensuring that we work closely with those communities is an absolute priority for us and a privilege from everyone.
That the target within the national plan to end gender violence within one generation is incredibly ambitious, but I think it has to be. We cannot continue going on with what's going on where we are, and the national plan, I think, this national plan, as it's been released, is a really good one in comparison to the draft. It's much broader. It refers to children, it refers to poor communities, it refers to First Nations, and when nationally, the process is to develop action plans that sit within that national plan. They're being worked, my understanding, they're being worked through at the moment with the states, and one of the important things out of that will be the development of the prevention strategy, which has been announced and certainly sits within the New South Wales strategy. I will certainly be making sure that our ministers, including Minister for Education, State Minister for Industrial Relations, actually work on that primary prevention plan and actually have tasks in place. There's some really great community examples that are happening in the space of primary prevention. I know that there's some associations with local community, with community leadership, working with local community leaders. I spoke with him a few weeks ago, and he's actually undertaken a course in how to intervene in domestic violence within families, and he's taking some incredibly brave decisions within his community, and I think that we should be encouraging that more and more. Organisations like Women and Girls Emergency Centre have got a program called All In, where they're actually taking primary prevention, respectful, what is a safe relationship, training to kids in early childhood centres and working with their families, and that's incredibly fantastic. And then there's New South Wales, who's actually developed a workplace program to roll out bicycle enrichment, so that people aren't bystanders and they call out their workmates. These are the things that we need to do in the primary prevention space across all communities.
Yeah, thank you. I think it is ambitious, but it's achievable. And again, it's one of those things we actually make it a priority, and we do primary prevention properly. We can have a real impact. And I think, when we think about doing it properly, it does mean not just the sort of piecemeal approach, but making sure that we are specifically accommodating and empowering particular diverse communities to lead their own way when it comes to what the best type of primary prevention is for them. And that really does mean recognising that people who are part of those communities should be leading the response in those communities, whether it be multicultural communities or queer communities, people with disability. If you don't have people who actually are representatives of that community involved, you're not going to get the same results. The other bit is to, of course, always have evidence-based policy, but also trauma-informed policy. And often I hear of these really well-meaning ideas and some of the bystander stuff that I think doesn't take into account the experience of a lot of victim survivors within a workplace or, I could go into that, but I think we need to be very careful to look at the onus that we're placing on victim survivors to sort of call out other people's behaviour as well. So we're very committed to ensuring that that primary prevention program is evidence-based, trauma-informed, and is done properly. Very concerned to see that the consent education that was supposed to be rolled out still hasn't been rolled out in our schools. We need to be doing so much better than that. It's, again, we care about it, we'll prioritise it, and we will fund it. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess first I'd like to acknowledge that I also come from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, so I know firsthand, I guess, some of the stigmas and long-held views about women leaving domestic situations that are violent. I know firsthand some family members that have been or are in those situations. So, yeah, what we're talking about here goes beyond financial support. What we're talking about here to achieve this goal is essentially cultural shift. And I mean that in a more broader sense. If we want to make cultural change, we need to bring the communities along with us and find those power brokers within the community, find those influential people and empower them and support them to actually make the change that is needed within those communities. It's also about setting high expectations. Having worked in those culturally diverse communities in education, I know if you want to make a cultural change in your school, you bring that community along and you set those high expectations in terms of what everyone expects of each other. And I think that's first and foremost over the top. That's what we need to do, is set those high expectations amongst our communities. This is what we expect when it comes to domestic violence. This is what we won't tolerate, regardless. But as I said, once again, finding those power brokers, find those influential people to make that cultural change within. And just like my answer to the question about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander programs, it needs to be led from those cultural groups themselves, because they know best what works for their communities.
Thank you. And that ends our questions for the forum today. So thank you for a big round of applause. And that, running Western Sydney Women, we are so focused on bringing up the next generation ready to take these positions. So we want to replace such a diverse group of women and a diverse group of voices. So we like to bring them along as much as possible. So to any politician out there, there's an opportunity for you to come along and participate in what you're doing and be involved and heard and be valued. It's really powerful, because I think they're going to make a big difference. But thank you again very much, and another round of applause. And Vice President of Research Enterprise International to the stage, and for those go to www.endgenderviolence.org and sign the pledge to end it, right? And then send it 5 minutes. Sydney, I just wanted to thank everybody that's been involved in today's forum very much. I was late, but I certainly enjoyed the last discussion and heard how powerful the earlier discussions and presentations were. So I think it's very clear that the trauma of domestic violence stays with those who experience, children and adults. And it resonates in ways that those who have not lived it rarely consider. And we've heard some of those impacts in the forum today.
The national plan to end violence against women and children, I think, best articulates that it's everyone's responsibility to end perpetration of violence against women and children and all victims of gendered violence. And that's why discussions such as today are so important. Bringing together the voices across the political spectrum to discuss how the work that has commenced can not only continue, but importantly, how it can be accelerated is absolutely vital. I just want to also call out how proud I am of the researchers and academics at Western Sydney University who work in the domestic violence space. They do tremendous work. They ensure that they are informed by lived experience, and that's what we've heard today, how vital that is. And it's only through taking that lived experience into account in a very deep way that the outcomes, the work that we do here can be translated into delivering real change to practices. So again, let me thank you all for coming today. Just a personal note to thank Professor Kerry Robinson. She does great work at Western Sydney University, and I'd just like to acknowledge her today. Thank you very much.
Well, that concludes the event. Now, would you like to come up and watch it? It's been helping much get online and find a page and give it money.
So just to note, if anyone was triggered by conversations today, with respect to the New South Wales TV lines, so do jump on those websites. You can speak to anybody, and thank you everyone for listening, and incredible to have everyone get to those speakers. Thanks to everybody. And a big thank you to this powerhouse, Amanda, for facilitating. You sign up page, that would be wonderful.
Yes, and then 10 to 5 people. Thank you.